So here we are at Thacker Cemetery, your family cemetery, Sue.
My family cemetery, that's right.
Awesome. Hey everybody, this is Russ from Family Tree Nuts, and we're in Thacker Cemetery in southeast Clark County. And why are we here today, Sue?
We're here to talk about my family cemetery that goes back about 5 or 6 generations of family that my family has not only been buried here, but they have cared for it over the years.
And the purpose of this video is basically to document each and every one of these people that are your kin, and so that everybody down the road can access it and learn about them.
That's right.
Let's go take a look at them.
Let's do that.
All right, at our first grave of the Thacker Cemetery, whose grave are we at?
Shadrach Thompson Caudle, my second great-grandfather.
Great-great-grandfather, Shadrach Thompson Caudle. What a cool name, Shadrach. What did he go by?
Shade.
Shade, or what do you guys call him?
We call him Gigi.
Gigi, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So when was Shadrach born?
He was born in 1845 in, I think, the spring, April, in Letcher County.
Okay.
Kentucky. He is a descendant of a great-grandson, I believe, of James Caudle.
How about that?
Who is in Blackie, Kentucky, and I think you've done a video on him before.
We've been there,
yeah. So he's descended through that family as well, and he spent most of his life growing up in and around the Letcher County area. His parents were William Riley Caudle and Cynthia Combs, and the Caudles had a logging company in around Breathitt County, and he would have kind of worked with his family at that point. But about the time he's a young teenager, Civil War breaks out.
So the Civil War broke out, and he joined the Union, I guess, right? Good American?
No, from Kentucky. It could have gone either way.
Right.
Could have easily gone either way. But he was from the hills of Kentucky, and he ended up joining the Confederacy. That was his cause. Him and his brother, James Patterson, joined together.
Was he he was in the Orphan Brigade, I think you said, right?
He ended up being part of the Orphan Brigade.
Wasn't that part of Caudle's army?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Exactly. He ended up, when him and his brother joined, his dad would have given them each a horse, and they joined in the Mounted Infantry.
Wow.
Company D.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, 5th Kentucky Infantry.
So when he was in the Civil War, where did he fight at?
He would have been in around Chickamauga. I believe, though, the muster rolls show that he maybe was sick for part of that, but he did, I believe, join them later, and then he was severely injured at the Battle of Dallas in Georgia.
Wow.
And I guess most where all the Orphan Brigade went, he would have been a part of that battle.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. That's something to be pretty proud of, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. He was, I guess, so dedicated to the cause, too, that he went by Thompson Caudle, which is why it says Thompson Caudle on the military marker, because he was actually too young to join. So he lied about his age and he lied about his name. So if you look for him in any of the documentation, he's listed as Thompson.
How old was he?
Caudle. He would have been 16, almost ready to turn 17.
Can you imagine?
No, that's such a young age.
That's absolutely amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
So did his unit win all their battles?
Not the last one, of course. Yeah, he definitely surrendered at Washington, Georgia.
Okay.
And then he ended up being paroled in May of 1865.
Okay.
As where he would have been, I guess, a traitor of the country, and then they paroled him, and he's a good U.S. citizen back then.
Yeah. Did he come home straight back to Kentucky?
Him and his brother were homeward bound, which is what a lot of them did, walking home, taking trains to go home. And in the process of being homeward bound, about 70 miles from Washington, Georgia, was a little town in Walton County, Georgia, called Social Circle.
Social Circle. I looked that up. It's just about, 40 miles east of Atlanta, I think.
That's right.
So.
It's not far from Atlanta at all. And him and his brother, of course, coming home, you got to eat. And they would knock on doors and ask strangers, kindness of strangers, if they could maybe get a bite to eat. So they knocked on one door, and this little girl, maybe 5 foot tall, opens the door. She has a little ribbon in her hair. And he says politely, "May I speak to the lady of the house?"
Right.
And she said, "Well, I am the lady of the house."
Okay.
Turned out to be Martha Susan,
okay.
Who he eventually married.
Oh, wow.
But she had an interesting life story herself, which when we talk about her life, I can fill more of that in. But she was a widow of of the Civil War as well. Had lost her first husband. She had 2 young children. There was a 9-year age difference between them. But
there's a word for that. We call that today, right?
I think she was a cougar. I think so, but that's okay. She might have set the term for cougar. but there probably more life realistically was the fact that there weren't a lot of eligible men around, and here was a strapping 19-year-old man showing up on her door.
Yeah, and we've seen pictures of him. He's a good-looking dude.
He's a good-looking man. He is a good-looking man. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so he stuck around, and they ended up marrying and having children there.
Awesome. Oh, that's a really good story. So he stayed there on the plantation with his new wife.
Right.
And I think you said that was it a cotton plantation?
It had been a cotton plantation.
They had some other folks that lived on the plantation as well. You want to talk about them?
They did. They had, of course, the Civil War, it freed slaves. And we don't know exactly, but we assume that there was such a good relationship between Martha Susan and her family and the slaves that were there that they chose to stay with them. And they helped to work the fields and work the cotton, along with Shadrach's brother, James Patterson. He stayed as well.
Right.
And so they worked. They were there for many years trying to make a go of it.
You know, we hear stories like that all the time, and we're not, by no means are we saying slavery was a good thing, but,
exactly.
but we hear stories all the time of, we think of one thing, we think of slavery, but then this was basically they were like family, you know.
They were family.
This particular instance were like family, and they traveled with them state to state.
They did.
Which we'll get into that here in a second,
right.
but they stayed with them together.
They were very strongly connected, even later years in life, and we'll chat about that too.
Sure. So they stayed there in Georgia and raised some cotton for a couple of years, and they got very wealthy from that, right?
No. That would have been a great little movie if that had happened, but because of Sherman's march to the sea and so much destruction through the whole area, train tracks, depots were all burned, and they had their cotton, they had it harvested, they had it to the train station, but they couldn't get it out of the train station because of Sherman's destruction. And it just sat and rotted there. So
General Sherman actually had a direct impact on your family.
He did.
Really did. So you guys are not fans of General Sherman, are you?
Not exactly, no.
He's definitely a demon in the South.
Yes, he is. And he altered the course of my family's life. But if that had not been the case, too, they might not have ended up in this area.
That's true. He may not have existed at all.
That's exactly right.
So you should be a fan of General.
Talking to nobody right now.
You should be a fan of General Sherman then, right? No.
I can't take it that far yet. No, not yet.
So I guess they couldn't make a go in Georgia, so they decided to uproot and
ended up in Louisiana, of all places. But from what I've read, there was a small little migration after the war of people in Georgia going to Louisiana. So they ended up in Lincoln Parish, the 3rd Ward there. They're in the 1880 census. And we had a hard time finding them in that census because I don't know if it was their accent and they couldn't understand them when they told them their name of Caudle, but they spelt it Cordell, Cordell. So we finally did find them on the census. All of them are there in 1880.
You know, a lot of times I find with accents like that Georgia accent, they speak a little slower, you know, put accents on different parts of the name, maybe.
Syllables.
Yeah,
syllables.
Maybe that was it, so, yeah. But then how long did they stay in Louisiana?
They weren't there very long because by 1883, in his pension rolls, he mentions that by April of 1883, they were back in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Which, for him, back in Kentucky, but the first time for Martha Susan and their kids to have ever been into Kentucky.
What a change, yeah.
Exactly.
He said, you know what, forget this, let's go back to where my people are from.
Right.
So.
Or he didn't make it where your family was.
Sure.
And so let's go here.
They moved here to Clark County, I guess.
They moved to Montgomery County, actually,
okay.
which is just a few miles from here.
Sure.
We're not far at all. But we have land records that show he bought land from John Allen in 1883, 102 acres, and they tried to make a go of it there. He was, I think, maybe a little unfortunate in his finances, and by 1885, we find that he has deeded the land to Martha Susan.
Wow.
And we're not 100% sure why that happened, but then by 1887, he deeds it back for the balance of the mortgage to Mr. Allen, who he had bought it from.
Interesting.
So, We're not maybe 5 miles from that area, I believe. We're pretty close.
So they lived in Montgomery County for a little while, but then they moved to Breathitt County, I think, right?
That's right. That would have been where the logging company was that his family owned. And
Wow.
they went there. All of their children went there. And at a certain point, and we can't find out exactly the time frame, but their second child that they had together, he took care of her 2 children, stepchildren, and then they had their second son, William. Okay, their second son, William, ended up being killed from an explosion at the logging company.
Oh, wow.
And he's buried somewhere up there off of Old Highway 15, but we don't know exactly where. We can't find that yet. That's one of my missions. But,
as a crow flies, that's not too very far from here.
That's not too far from here, exactly right. So I don't know if that was the catalyst to have them leave Breathitt County.
Right.
But when they were here before, their children had met and married, and they're buried in this cemetery as well. They had some other children that met people in the local area, so it brought them back to this area.
That's really cool. And I think, and later on, he came back here, like you said, and he got a pension.
He did.
For the Civil War.
He did. 1912, we have pension papers for him. And of course, it lists him as Thompson, Caudle. And in the pension papers, they're asking questions. They ask what the value of his land is. I think they had like 10 acres, which is just right around the corner from where we're actually at.
Wow.
The house is still standing that their son built for them.
Wonderful.
They had 10 acres in the house, and I think the value of that entire thing was like $250.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did he have any medical issues or anything?
He did. He had a condition called catarrh, and rheumatism, and just a general nervous condition as well.
Wow.
So he had suffered quite a bit, even as a young man, from the effects, I believe, of the Civil War.
Yeah, I bet he did. There's a lot of things that we don't know that these guys went through. If he was in those battles, like you said, you said,
right?
He probably had some issues, I guess, kind of thing. So
physical and emotional and mental. Along with the pension papers, they also would have had witnesses that would have said, yes, I know he was in the war because I served with him.
Right.
And there was a G.W. Sewell who made the comment in there that he was a most excellent and valiant soldier, that he was always ready for any arduous duties.
Oh, that's really cool.
So
I like
think that says a lot about
Yeah, I like that. That's a great
Yeah.
line. That's something that it would be neat to have as a plaque on the wall. I think that's really cool. So
yeah. I think he was a fine gentleman. But he also, and like I said, their son James, who's buried here as well, had built them a home, which we're just like right around a 90-degree turn from where that house is still standing. And in behind it, he was a very religious man, loved the Lord. And in behind it, he had one of his granddaughters told us that he had a little grotto that he would go out to every day. He would practice preaching, doing sermons, and spend time with the Lord back there.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Right there behind his house?
Right there behind his house.
Yeah, that's really, really neat. Do you know where that's at?
I do. I know exactly.
Awesome.
Well, the grotto no longer is there.
Okay.
But there's a little valley behind the house, but the house is still standing.
Wonderful. That's really cool. So when did he die?
He would have died in 1924.
Okay.
He lived a pretty good life, once stayed in this area, and would have been living in that little white house.
Wonderful.
1924.
These are great stories. Shadrach here is such a cool name, Shade.
Shade. That's what most people called him.
Or Thompson,
Shade.
I guess, Thompson.
Yeah.
But, this is a really neat story. He came from a Revolutionary War vet himself, fought in the Civil War, and what a neat story about how he met a gal down in Georgia Peach.
Right.
And eventually changed his life,
and
here we are today,
right.
on June 1st of 2020, talking about him. So what a really neat guy. I'm glad you brought me out to meet Shadrach here. And
well, I'm glad that we're documenting his story too, because I think he's just a fine fella to talk about and to remember. There are so many people like him, and you see headstones when you're walking through cemeteries, but I think it's important, and this is why I am excited about doing this, is making sure that future generations and others know his life and celebrate it.
Absolutely. And definitely somebody you guys should be proud of, for sure.
Very proud.
Absolutely. So we learned about Shadrach, Shadrach Caudle, and now we're going to learn about his wife. What's her name?
Martha Susan. She went by Susan, but it's Martha Susan Callahan Buchanan Caudle.
Awesome. Your great-great-grandmother. A real live victim of the Civil War. She's your great-great-grandmother.
That's right.
When was she born?
She was born in April of 1836 in Walton County. Social Circle, Georgia.
I think that's about 30 miles or so, 30, 40 miles east of Atlanta.
That's right. That's right. She would have been raised on this plantation. She was the daughter of Jacob Callahan. He was a wealthy plantation owner and also a minister.
Oh, wow.
And very famous in his circle of Baptist preachers.
You really have some really cool people in your family, you know, and not just Kentucky royalty, but you have a great-great-great-grandfather who was a wealthy plantation owner in Georgia.
Yeah,
that's pretty neat.
Cool. Yeah.
So she inherited, I guess, the plantation with her husband worked there too.
She married actually her first cousin, a John Buchanan, and so they would have gotten land. Not only did she get land from her parents, but from his family as well.
Wow.
And they had 2 daughters.
Okay.
And then he went off to the war. And sadly, she lost him about 1862.
1862.
Yeah, they married in 59, and he died in 1862.
So she stayed there working in plantation, you know, with the other folks that were there. And then how did she actually... where does the story go from there?
Well, while she's there, actually, it's interesting because when Sherman came through, she would have witnessed during the 60s while the war was going on, the depot burning in her town and the soldiers coming through. There's documentation they came through that area and burned.
Wow.
So she would have been part of that, that experience, which I'm sure shaped her life as well. By the time the war ended, she would have lost her first husband, both her parents, a brother in the war.
Unbelievable.
Already in the war, exactly right. So she's there at their plantation, right outside of town, by herself with her 2 daughters. And one day, a couple of gentlemen come knocking on her door.
Okay.
And when she answers the door, she's greeted by a gentleman asking about wanting to speak to the lady of the house.
Yeah.
And she just politely tells him that she is the lady of the house.
Awesome. That's a really cool story. You know that exact story there. She was a real tall lady, wasn't she?
She was a petite little thing. He actually didn't realize she was the lady of the house because she was a short little lady with a little ribbon tied up in her hair. So she probably did look younger than her 29 years of age.
You said she's about 5 feet tall.
She was about 5 feet
and,
tall.
And she was a real live Southern belle.
She was.
You know,
she definitely
wearing those type of clothing and things like that. And
exactly.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. And who was the guy that knocked on the door?
Well, it ended up being her future husband, Shadrach, Caudle.
Awesome, awesome.
He was 9 years younger than her.
Wow, 9 years.
9 years, yeah. She might have been a cougar. But
she said that, not me.
But anyway, or he was eligible. He was the guy that came after the war, and there weren't that many eligible soldiers. And strapping young man of like 19, 20 years old.
Sure.
And he stayed. He liked what he saw, and he stayed. And they married in November of 1865.
Where was he from?
He was from Kentucky.
Okay.
In eastern Kentucky, Letcher County boy.
Letcher County. He was when the Orphan Brigade. He was in Caudle's army.
That's right.
Eastern Kentucky group of Confederates had been in many different battles and such. He actually was captured, I think, at the Battle of Dallas.
Battle of Dallas, injured and captured and surrendered there in Washington, Georgia, which was about 70 miles from Social Circle. So they would have traveled heading back home to be homeward bound and come through Social Circle coming back to Kentucky.
That's really neat. So he met her, decided to stay there and get married there and work on the plantation and such. Now they had some other folks that worked on the plantation. Who were they? They
did. Actually, Martha Susan was known to their slaves that they owned, which of course we don't agree with that, but it was part of the times that she taught them how to read, and that wasn't a very popular thing that happened back then. It was illegal, exactly right. So that's why it wasn't popular.
So she was a rebel.
She was a rebel, that's right. She minded a rebel. So, but she taught them to read, and they stayed with her. So they were more family than anything because they chose to stay with her and shade and help them run the plantation, raise cotton,
and they moved them from other states with as a family group.
Exactly. Once they weren't able to make a go of it in Georgia, they ended up in Louisiana, and they moved with them.
Wow.
They migrated from Louisiana here in Kentucky. They moved with them, and ended up living basically right next door to them, which is just right around like half a mile from where we're sitting right now, and established a little community There's a cemetery over there. And then years later, our grandparents, which would have been our grandfather would have been their grandson, would get oranges from California from some of their descendants.
Oh, that is really cool.
So they stayed connected through all those years.
That is a cool
That
story.
would have been like in the 60s and 70s even.
Right, right. So they moved to Louisiana, then they ended up moving to Kentucky, a couple different places here in Kentucky that matches her husband Shade's story.
Exactly.
And
and then they landed in this area where we're sitting. Their son James built them a house, and they ended up staying here.
I think she's well known to be a very spiritual, very Christian lady, wasn't she?
She was. She was raised by very strict religious parents. Her father being a minister, and she carried that through. She was. They had after they married, they had 6 children of their own, and they established an altar within their home.
Wow.
That the day that she died was still there. And he wrote
an altar. You said an altar to pray at,
to actually bow down,
right
kneel down, and pray right there in the house. Yeah.
So they had lots of children, I think, didn't they?
They went on and had 6 children.
Okay.
All but 2 of them are buried here.
Wow.
We talked about William, which was their second child, that in a mining accident, and he died in eastern Kentucky.
Wow.
They came back here, but when they were in Louisiana, they had a daughter, Louisa, and she was about 12 or 13, and she passed away from hemorrhage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So she was a hemophiliac. We do know that, and I believe it was quite possibly buried either in Georgia or Louisiana.
Wow.
So where we're sitting, though, actually does have one of her children, Jenny, that she had with her first husband. The oldest child that she had was Margaret, or they called her Maggie. And when they were in Louisiana, she actually met her husband down there, and she stayed in Louisiana and they ended up in Oklahoma, and she's buried out in Oklahoma. And then when they came here, so Jenny's here, their oldest boy together, James, is here, and where we're sitting is the land that James owned.
Okay.
And when he passed away, he was buried here, and it kind of started this cemetery in 1916.
Oh, wow.
So when his wife sold the land, it was sold except for the 1/4 of an acre that contained a cemetery.
It's over 100 years old, I guess. You weren't here then, so
no, not long after, but I wasn't here then. But then they had 3 other daughters that are buried here. There's Kayreen, Carrie, and then my great-grandmother, Evelina.
Awesome.
Who we're going to talk a little bit about, too.
So she had quite an unusual life. Born in Georgia, Southern Belle, plantation owner. War took everything from her. Moved around all over the place. Ended up living in the hills of eastern Kentucky. What a unique story that she had, and somebody you should be daggone proud of.
I am.
Kind of thing. When did she die?
She died in 1922. I believe it was like around January of 1922.
So she lived a long time.
She was into her 80s.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Right.
That's great.
And the interesting thing, too, she was born on land that would have been part of the Indian land grants in Georgia. That's how her dad got the land in Walton County. And she ends up dying on land that ends up being Indian Oldfields, the last Indian village in Kentucky.
How about that? Yeah, start and
quite
finish
that
there.
Start and finish for her life. Yeah,
really
pretty
neat.
interesting.
Really neat.
Yeah, and Shadrach wrote. I have an article that he wrote about her, talking about her love for life and how she loved the Lord, and how it's just what she taught him how to read, and the wording on it is just so emotional and quite beautiful.
Yeah, that really is.
Yeah, I think she had quite the. She'd be one I'd love to talk to if I could go back in time and find out what she thought about the changes in her life.
Yeah, absolutely. And at least you've documented that, for all future descendants, and brought these stories forward so everybody can see them. So here we are at the gravesite of Martha Susan Callahan Buchanan Caudle. Here in the great Thacker Cemetery in southeast Clark County, Kentucky. A lady that saw so many changes in her life, from southern plantation owner to living in eastern Kentucky. All right, so moving along now, we're now up to your great-grandfather here, Mr. Daniel B. Watts.
Correct.
He was a rambler and a gambler, and
a little drinking on the side.
A little drinking on the side. Great-grandfather. Awesome. Yeah. The B didn't stand for anything?
No, everybody thought it stood for Boone, but he added it in there because he wanted it an initial.
Like Daniel Boone. I got it. Pretty cool. But he wasn't nothing.
It wasn't Boone. Nope, it was just an initial.
Oh, Daniel B.
That's
Cool.
right.
So when was Daniel born?
He was born November 3rd, 1876, and his parents were Thomas Jefferson Watts and Rachel Francis. He was in Breathitt County when he was born. Quite an interesting story about his dad, but when we get to that point, I'll tell you a little bit more about him too.
I guess we should start now.
Oh, okay. Well, his father, Tom Watts, was blue-eyed and wanted to make sure that there was not a lonesome lady in Breathitt County, and he lived up to that.
One of those.
One of those. So while he was married to Rachel,
He was a tomcat. Tom was a tomcat.
Tom was a tomcat.
Okay.
Roundabout, yes. He was married to Rachel, which is Dan's mom, and then he had a little lady on the side, and they had about 11 children. And then after Rachel died, he married Melinda, and then got him someone else that he didn't want her to be lonesome, and they had about 10 more children. So he had about 30 kids or so.
30 kids his dad had.
He did.
His dad had 30-some kids. Your great-great-grandfather.
My great-great-grandfather.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it does say in the Bible to procreate, live long and prosper.
Well, I think that's Spock, but.
Oh yeah, that's Spock. That's not the Bible. what does it say in the Bible to
go forth and populate?
There you go. There you go. A little different.
Right. But because his father was that, it kind of sets the stage for Daniel's mindset for the type of.
It does. It does. The example that he had and his background that he came from.
Exactly.
So tell us a little bit about Daniel then. Your great grandfather. Said he was. Did he know his dad at all?
Yes, he was raised with his parents.
Okay.
He knew them quite well, and but we don't know. I think he just stayed in Breathitt County around Lost Creek, Kentucky, right there on the Breathitt-Perry County line. And not a lot was really documented or known about him until he married Evelina.
Okay.
And they were 17 and 18.
Okay.
Rode off on horseback.
Neat.
Went to the courthouse. No family was present, so I don't think that there was the blessing of her dad.
Oh, yeah,
who
interesting.
we've already talked about.
Because he came from the rowdy group.
He did come from the rowdy group. I'm not so sure that he was approved of, but
she
loved him, so she hopped on that horseback and they rode off. Got married in October of 1893 in Perry County.
1893 in Perry County. That's not too far as a crow flies from here. So
it's not.
A little bit of a drive, but not too far.
Not too far.
And you said that he was a drinker, a rowdy guy, kind of thing like that. He saw some stuff. He went on some trips.
He did. He ended up, before I believe they were married and then after, he was involved in several card games.
Surely not.
Witnessed some shootings on a courthouse step.
Oh, wow.
There's even the story of they were bringing noble boys up to the courthouse steps, and one of them got killed. And someone yelled out, "Hey, there's Dan Watts." And they chased him into the woods and found his hat with a bullet hole in his hat.
Ooh.
And he disappeared for a little while at that point, kind of went on the lam, running from the law, or the noble boys, we're not sure.
Wow.
But there was a card game involved as well, poker going on. And
so he wasn't a friend of the noble boys.
He was not a friend of the noble boys, and they were not a friend of his. That's
I see,
yes. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So quite the character in that sense. And
sounds like an Eastern Kentucky feud.
It might have been a little bit of a Watts Noble, Hatfield McCoy type thing going on.
Sure.
It was Eastern Kentucky.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So one of those times, though, he did go running from the law, ended up in Floyd County in a town called Bosco, Kentucky. Bosco, that's right. And he ended up having relations with the boarding house owner, and they had a child who that's at least one of his children that we think might be out there. But we did get the pleasure of getting to meet this child. His name is Richard, and became a very loving family member.
Your great uncle, I guess, or
he was,
your granduncle technically.
My granduncle, exactly.
Right.
Would have been my half brother to my grandfather.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Really cool.
Yeah. So he got around Breathitt County, Perry County. He didn't really hold jobs very well either. At one point in 1920, they were in Muncie, Indiana, and he was working at a factory. So we know they were there for a little while.
Yeah.
And then earlier than that, he had a job as a farmhand in Fayette County.
Okay.
So his main occupation, though, he did actually work other than factory. He sewed for Stark Brothers fruit trees.
So he not just a farmer, but he was a salesman too, wasn't he?
He was a salesman, that's exactly right. And we hear a pretty good salesman too. He would go around selling fruit trees, apples, peaches, anything of that nature. And he would take delivery and then deliver them himself. So he would go back and deliver the fruit trees.
Wow, that's pretty neat.
And when we were little, there were several fruit trees on the farm that he would have planted.
That's incredible, yeah.
Kind of have one now, but
yeah, all we have left is a peach tree now.
But
awesome.
It's a descendant
Shut up.
of a peach tree.
So they traveled around quite a bit. As a matter of fact, in the 1900 census, Evelina, his wife, states that she's a widow.
Oh.
And we know for a fact that he was still living.
Uh-huh.
Because there were several more children born after that.
Okay.
And it was probably a good thing that he did get around, because they ended up having 11 children. I can't imagine how many they might have had if he stuck around the whole time.
Yeah, he was just like his dad.
He was just like his dad.
So that's good.
Exactly.
Strong genes, I guess. I think you said he was on a train one time and saw something horrific, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was like around the train, either on the train or on the train tracks, and he saw a man that was gutted.
Oh my God.
And he was a witness to that. And
wow.
I don't know if he just didn't like the law, didn't want to be interviewed, but my grandfather, his son, ended up finding a gentleman that had a blackberry wagon in town, and he hid him on the blackberry wagon. He was trying to sell blackberries in town, hid him on the wagon, and got him out of town, snuck him out of town that way.
Interesting story there.
Yeah.
Wow.
The interesting thing, too, about him is we know he was married at least 4 times.
Okay.
However, we cannot find a divorce certificate from Evelina, his first wife.
I see.
But we know that he was living with, married to, at least 3 other women.
Do you find divorce certificates of them?
No.
So
we do find one.
Why do you need a divorce certificate, right? You know, and in the Bible it says, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. You say that, yeah, and he's good to go.
Turn around, click your heels 3 times.
He was biblical.
So. He was biblical. So he did get around, and he was living with his son for several years on the farm that actually my siblings, I have a younger sister and brother that we own now. He was living with his son on that farm, and there used to be a distillery on it, and because he was such a drinker, my grandfather disassembled it. Wow. One of my aunts says she remembers it standing when they bought the farm, and he went and disassembled it. He was afraid he'd go running moonshine out of that. So he didn't want to give him any temptation. And I guess for something to do, Daniel took stones and made little cairns that were located around the farm, and they're still there.
Wow, that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
You don't have any moonshiners in your family, do you?
No.
Officially no.
Officially no.
Next question.
Moving on. But he ended up living quite an interesting life, getting around, rounder and drinker.
And when did he pass away?
He passed away in 1953, and it actually was the day that my mother was graduating high school.
Wow.
And they were coming by. They lived a fourth of a mile. Not a mile from where my mother and her parents lived. They were heading out to go to her graduation. And his last wife was on the front porch flagging them down, and he had had a stroke.
Oh, goodness.
And so a cousin went ahead and took Mom onto her graduation, and my grandfather stopped and took care of him, and he died May 28th, 1953.
Wow.
Yeah, on that day.
So here we are at the gravesite of Daniel Watts, Daniel B. Watts. The B means nothing.
Right.
It's not Boone. And he is your great-grandfather here, and here at Thacker Cemetery, southeast Clark County, Kentucky. So Sue, now we're at the gravesite of the next person here in your family. Who's this?
This is my great-grandmother, Evelina Nata Caudle Watts.
Awesome. Who married Daniel Watts.
That's correct.
All right, let's learn about her. She's the epitome of the old phrase, stand by your man. When was Evelina born?
She was born in 1875 down in Georgia. She down on the former plantation in Georgia, right outside of Atlanta, Social Circle.
Yeah, so her mother actually had a plantation, and her father came from Kentucky.
That's right.
You know, that was a soldier down there with the Confederacy, and found her mom, and she was born down there. That's really cool.
She was the baby of the family, and she was born down there. When she was about 4 or 5, they tried their hand in Louisiana, for a little while, and they were only there for a few years. So she, at a young age, she moved around.
So, and she ended up living the majority of her time though here in Kentucky, and I think she said they moved to Mount Sterling for a really specific reason.
They did. Her mother wanted to make sure that her 3 daughters, had finishing school.
Okay.
Went to finishing school, and there was one in Mount Sterling, and her daughter, my Aunt Sue, would talk about going to that finishing school as a reunion when she was a little girl with her mom. So that finishing school was around for a little while.
Yeah, that's really
She
neat.
wanted her to be well educated.
And I guess she married Daniel Watts.
She did. They were both young.
They had just a couple kids.
Couple of 11 kids.
11 kids.
They had
All right.
11 children. That's right. That pretty much was her world, her life.
Sure.
Her man and her kids.
She had 11 kids, and I think you said we started this story here of Stand By Your Man. Why is she known for that?
Well, Daniel, as we talked about a little earlier, he was around her. He wasn't always in the picture.
Okay.
In the 1900 census, she's living with her parents, Martha, Susan, and Shadrach, just right around the corner. Lists her and 2 of her children, and she's listed as widowed.
Wow, but she wasn't a widow.
She wasn't a widow. He was still very much alive.
She wasn't standing by him right then.
Well, she
It
not
probably
next
could have
to
been
him.
her parents that listed that in there as just a way of saving face.
Could very well be. I think that was something that was prevalent then.
Yeah, for the time we see that quite often.
Right.
But she did stand by him because he was a rowdy guy. He'd been in trouble with the law, this and that and the other thing, and we know he's got at least some extra children here and there. And but she was known to stand by him.
She was. Anytime he came back into the picture, she moved wherever he wanted to go. They lived in Breathitt County, Perry County, here in Clark County. They were in Fayette County for a while. Even in the 1920 census, they were in Muncie, Indiana.
Wow.
She even has a picture of the house that they lived in Muncie, and on the back of it she wrote "Our House," and she something about "I love this place." I believe it might have been the happiest time of her life because she had Daniel with her and all of her children.
That's really neat. That's really neat right there to say that, I think you said too that whenever he did come around, Daniel, her husband, came around, the kids got sent.
Yeah, my aunt used to tell the story that she would go and she would stay with Evelina when she was a little girl, and when Daniel showed up, she was promptly sent back home to her parents.
Time for the kids to
leave, and
that's why they have 11.
That's why they have 11. If he'd have been around more, they probably would have had many more than 11 kids.
Hey, that's all right.
But that's okay. That's okay. But she definitely stood by him whenever he was in town, at least.
Absolutely.
Her 11 children, a lot of them are buried around here. That pretty much, other than Dan, they were her world. But she had a hard time in life. It was really a challenge because her first child was Maggie May. When Maggie was 3 years old, and she would have been named after Evelina's oldest sister, Margaret, who died in Oklahoma. But she named her Maggie May, and her dress caught fire when she was 3 years old from the fireplace, and she died from that.
Oh, wow.
And so she died from burns, complications from burns from the fireplace. And then her second child was stillborn, and this is all recorded in her family Bible. Right. It was a stillborn, or didn't live maybe a few days. And then her third child, Lily, thankfully, Lily lived to be 96, I believe.
96.
She married a Brashear, and they settled in eastern Kentucky around Viper. So she had a good long life. And her fourth child was a son, William Bill. He lived in eastern Kentucky. He was about 61 years old, I think, when he passed away. And then her fifth child was a girl, Lula, and Lula married when she was 20. And then a year later, she died in childbirth along with the baby. So she was 21 when she passed away. So Evelina lost another child.
Wow.
At this point, we're to 3 children having lost them. And then the sixth child was Taylor, which is my grandfather. And thankfully, he lived in this area that we're standing in. He was 89.
Wow.
89 and a half. And he lived a good long life. We're going to talk about him in a little bit as well. But then the seventh child was John, and I believe he was about 70. He lived in Indiana for most of his life. He was he carried on a little family tradition too. I think he ran from the law, and he kind of landed in Indiana.
He always had a gun in his car.
Had a gun, yeah, yeah. Always had a gun in his car for a reason. Yeah.
So do I.
Well, I think well, probably
a different
Maybe different reasons though, right?
Probably smart back then and now. Yeah, absolutely. So her 8th child, Mary Susan, is buried here in the cemetery. We called her Sue growing up. She was Aunt Sue. Never would let my niece and nephew, no, it wasn't named after her either. Nope. But I never would let my niece and nephew call me Aunt Sue because I didn't. But anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, but anyway.
Understood.
Yeah. She was quite the character though. She had, we need to do a story about her because she had quite an interesting life as well. But she lived to be 91.
Wow.
And the 9th child was Arthur. He's buried here in the cemetery too. He was 80 when he passed away, and actually at Pearl Harbor the day it was bombed.
Oh, wow.
Getting ready to be discharged and re-upped for I think another year or two because of the bombing. Thankfully he came home, and then the last child, the 10th child was Anna Earl, which she's actually buried right here next to her mother. She had rheumatic fever, and she died of heart problems, complications from rheumatic fever at the age of 8.
Oh, wow.
So Daniel signed that. A
lot of tragedy, I think.
A lot of tragedy. She lost a lot. And then the last child that she had was stillborn as well. So she had a lot of loss.
I think you said that was right before they were living in Muncie when, she was happiest thing because there's a lot of death and things that happened shortly thereafter.
Exactly.
And you said she was a very religious woman too, I think you said.
She was very religious. She loved the Lord. She, of course, was raised by parents who loved the Lord, had an altar in their home as she was growing up. So that would have been what she saw every day. We're actually right across the road from El Bethel United Methodist Church, and she was a member there, and when she would get filled with the Holy Spirit, she'd start dancing. Okay. And when she danced around the church, she'd lose her hairpins. They would just fly right out. So,
something she's known for.
Something she's known for, absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah, a lot of family, it's interesting for them to know that for her. And but she also had quite an interesting sense of humor because she used to, my aunt, she would tell us the stories, the jokes that she used to tell her. And one of them was about her little dog, Peppermint. Peppermint was a cute little dog. Yeah, had a little hair ribbon in her hair, prim and proper little dog. Kind of disappeared one day and comes back, and she's all muddy and the ribbon's gone, and she looks pretty rough. And she goes, "Peppermint, where have you been?" And she goes, "My name's not Peppermint, it's Whorehound now." so the lovely religious lady with the hairpins flying out of her hair definitely liked to laugh too.
That's funny. Yeah, that's good. That's a good way to. That's a good snapshot of who she was as a person. Right. It really is. So
yeah, she was quite the character, and she passed that sense of humor on down to her kids.
So she stood by Daniel, the whole time and things like that, and never found a divorce record or anything like that. But when did she pass away?
She passed away in 1947. She had, many years before that, had several cancers. Skin cancer, breast cancer, and then eventually stomach cancer, which is what she passed away from. But her son took her all over for treatment, UK, Cincinnati, but she eventually succumbed to the stomach cancer in 1947.
And so she definitely sounds like a great character and somebody that it's great that you've documented her because a lot of people skip their females in their generation. They don't fight in wars, usually, and they don't invent things or do crazy stories, but she's definitely a lady that we want to remember, and it's been somebody that was a nurturer and very, very important to her family, and it's great that you've honored and documented her for all future generations.
Absolutely. Yeah, her story still needs to be told because she might not have been in the wars, but she kept the kids fed and loved. And it's quite interesting too, her sisters are buried here, and they had roses throughout this entire cemetery. So they were my sister and I planted these roses in honor of that because they had this entire cemetery filled with roses, and every day they would walk up here and tend to the cemetery, tend to their ancestors, and tend to the roses.
You can see those pictures. You can see those roses in the pictures that you have over there.
Yeah, it was filled with roses.
Wow.
Yeah. So her heart was here. So she was some might call her ordinary, but obviously very special to me and to my family, and her story does need to be told.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, one more thing about it. There's one more thing we got to bring up about it that's very unique. What?
Yeah, she was in her 70s actually, and she did not pass this on, like her sense of humor.
She did to Rowena.
She didn't, in my direct line, pass this on, but she did not have a gray hair in her head.
No gray hair?
She was dark-headed till the day she passed away.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
We do have a cousin who is the same way. She does it, yeah.
What's that cousin's name?
Rowena.
Rowena, all right.
Rowena.
So she didn't have to buy any hair treatments back then, did she?
No,
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
So
it is pretty cool.
to figure out what that DNA strand is, you know.
I need to go searching for it. I could bottle that and sell it.
Not a gray hair in her head. She wasn't stressed out a bit. So here we are at the gravesite of Evelina Natai Caudle Watts, the epitome of a wonderful, loving grandmother and mother and grandmother here in Thacker Cemetery in southeastern Clark County. All right, Sue. So now we're at, I guess, your grandfather's grave.
Right, B.T. Watts.
B.T. Watts. Let's learn about him.
Let's do it.
He was a hobo, a coal cutter, a farmer, and he loved his family. So his name was B.T. Benjamin Taylor.
That's correct. Well, actually, he wasn't named that when he was a baby. He was actually named Taylor Benjamin after two uncles, one uncle, one great uncle. But people like to call him TB. Yeah, that was an acronym for tuberculosis about the time in the
1904.
Yeah,
that was pretty.
That was not a good. So he legally changed his name to Benjamin Taylor, but
it's BT.
He became BT. A lot of people knew him as BT, but a lot of people called him Taylor.
Okay, went by Taylor. That's great. Now, when was he born?
He was born in 1904, February of 1904 in Ned, Kentucky, which is on the banks of Lost Creek.
On the banks of Lost Creek.
Lost Creek.
Ned, Kentucky.
That's right.
What county is that?
That would be in Breathitt County.
Okay.
Yep. And he lived there as a little boy for most of his early childhood. He lived there. But by the time about 1912, he did complete a third grade education.
Okay.
But this would have been about a time too that his mother would have been pregnant.
Okay.
His dad probably would not have been around.
Okay.
So he quit school.
All right.
He only had a third grade education, and I'll just say at this moment, he's probably the most educated, uneducated man I ever met.
Okay, I understand that.
Absolutely.
I definitely can relate to that. Yeah.
So when he quit school, he was a water boy when they were paving Highway 15 up in Perry County, in eastern Kentucky.
Bringing the guys water.
Bringing the guys water, whatever they needed, running errands, I guess. So he would have been about 8 years old.
Then I guess in 1920, the family moved up to Muncie, Indiana.
Right, he would have been about 16. He went with them. He is listed in the census as working at a factory, an auto factory.
Yeah.
And I think Muncie, Indiana at that time was very well known for their automobiles.
Isn't it wild to think about a 16-year-old working as a man, working a man job, and
I think he's been working since he was 8 years old.
16-year-olds today can't get their self dressed every day, or kind of thing.
Yeah, he definitely was not the 16-year-olds we see today.
That's awesome. And I think in the early 1920s he did a really cool adventure, didn't he?
He did. Right after the Muncie, Indiana, we think maybe around, I think he was about 17, so 21. He decided he met a guy named Dave Colburn.
Okay.
And they were hobos.
They were what?
They were hobos.
Oh, cool.
Hobos, which actually was a little bit of a shortening for Homeward Bound, which I thought was kind of cool because his grandfather Shadrach was Homeward Bound also. And hobo is short for home bound, hobo. So he hoboed, kind of trekking along. All the way out to Colorado with him.
Oh, wow.
He taught himself how to play harmonica. I kind of envision him sitting on one of the little carts on the train tracks doing his harmonica, or sitting around the fire at night playing his harmonica. He loved to sing Red River Valley.
Red River Valley.
I could almost picture that.
How about Big Rock Candy Mountain? That was a big popular song during that time.
If it was, he knew it. He definitely knew it.
So by 1922, he's back in Kentucky after his adventure, and
he is back. We figured he probably came back because that would have been when his grandmother died. Maybe his mother needed him. He always was there for his family, if for nothing else. He was always there for his family. And that's when they were in eastern Kentucky, and he learned to cut coal. And he was a coal miner for 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
Then he met a gal, and how did he meet? He met a gal and got married.
Actually, we back up just a little bit, because in 1915, his family would have moved to Fayette County.
Okay.
And his dad had gotten a job on the farm.
Before they went to Indiana.
Before they went to Indiana, next door to the White family. And there would have been a young girl about 13 years old, which would have been my grandmother, that he would have met for the first time. But
cool.
Papa had an older sister, Lula, that was the same age as my grandmother, and they became best friends.
Okay.
And they communicated through letters for years.
Awesome.
So that would have been about 1915.
Your aunt and your grandmother.
And my grandmother. Yeah. They would have communicated through letters and been good friends kept in touch that way.
Okay.
So he ends up back in Eastern Kentucky, and Lula, we talked about before, had died in childbirth. So Papa,
His sister Lula,
that's correct, died in childbirth, and since Lula and Mama had written letters, Papa wanted to make sure that Mama knew about Lula's passing, and they started writing letters back and forth. And I tend to believe that through their letters, they fell in love.
Wow.
Yeah, they did that for about 4 years, actually, because that was about 1922, 23, I think, and they married in 27.
So they wrote letters.
So they ended up getting to know each other.
That's a really neat story. That's a very romantic story.
We still have those letters.
You do?
We do. We have those letters.
Can you read them all? There's nothing in there.
There's nothing in there that I've got.
You don't have to black anything out or anything, right?
No, we haven't had to edit anything. I'm going to have to go back and reread them now, see if I can find anything.
Right. You got to type them out, and put them in a document. That'd be really neat. So that's a really cool story. So by 1930, I think they went back to Lexington.
They did. It's real interesting when they married. She is in Lexington, and he takes her to Perry County to a coal mine camp in Happy, Kentucky.
Happy
Kentucky.
Happy Kentucky. He's born in Ned, lived in Happy.
Lived in Happy. Good old Eastern Kentucky names. And when he moved her in, though, before she moved in, he had already gone and furnished their house. Cool. Bought the furniture, made sure it was perfect for her the minute she walked in, and it was ready to go. And we still have the furniture and most of that the bedroom furniture. And they only had that bedroom furniture for their entire marriage.
Neat.
They never got any. We still have that.
Oh, that's really cool.
It's really cool. So, but by 1930, yes, they were back in Lexington. They're listed in the 1930 census living on Broadway, and it has him, and he's a mining demonstrator.
What is that?
I think he's mining equipment. Okay. At one point, he's in safety for mining, so I think he's researching and demonstrating how safe it is at that point, trying to make it safer, having worked in the coal mine. Sure. But he's gone a lot. So the census actually lists Mama along with their first child, Ben, and Papa's sister, Aunt Sue, and Mama's two sisters, Dolly and Willie. So they all live there together.
Pretty cool, cool.
Yeah.
And I think in 1934 they bought a farm.
Well, obviously his family was still living in the area that we are in. And before that, they had looked for some land because they wanted to move here. But they ended up buying this land, and the land in 1934, built their house on it, and over a few years, and by 1937, they moved there permanently. Okay. But the interesting thing is they had looked at the land about a year or so before, and there was a cool house there. But by the time they went back, weather had kind of gotten tore it down a little bit. I know. I'd love to have seen it. However, they did salvage the floor in the house that we still own in our family. The flooring, the steps, the mantles, the stair railing, and everything came out of this old house. So he repurposed everything. Of course, they lived through the Depression, and that was part of the Depression. Sure. And they didn't throw anything away, so they used all of that. And
he was a self-taught farmer in the UK, or
yeah, he actually did. He didn't know anything about farming, but he, through UK's extension office, he taught himself how. He was, like I said, the smartest uneducated man I ever met.
And he loved geology.
He did. He absolutely loved geology. We have a cool picture of him holding a geology book. Yeah. And that's actually in the home where they lived in Eastern Kentucky.
So cool.
But he also has, and I have...
Not genealogy, geology, rocks.
Geology, rocks.
Yeah,
rock
buddy.
on, that's right. He loved it so much that he researched the Silver Swift mine, which is in the Appalachian Mountains, that was first discovered in, I think, around 1760 or so by Jonathan Swift. Okay. And there's folklore that there's still silver in them there hills. Right. And he thought it truly was there. And the interesting thing about him, too, he was a douser. He actually could take a stick and douse for water. And I think he thought he could also find minerals exactly. It would move on him. It actually would. When he would come across water, that stick would move, and he'd know exactly where he is. As a matter of fact, the springs on the farm that he maintained for his cattle, he found with his dowsing stick.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Wow, what a neat guy.
He was a cool guy. That's why I say he's my hero.
And then he was an active member at the church, I think, too. So.
He was, absolutely. He taught Sunday school until he ended up with cancer and couldn't teach it anymore. So that was into the 1990s. He still taught Sunday school.
Was this the gentleman you were telling me that people used to go over and see, or the girls would come spend the night over there?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's right. Yes. My mother's friends, like she had a lot of friends in high school and stuff, and they would go to each other's house like young girls do and spend the night, but they mostly wanted to go to Mom's, and she found out why they wanted to go to Mom's, because they thought her dad looked like Spencer Tracy.
And he does. I'm showing you a picture of that.
Yeah.
The side by side there.
I've never seen the side by side.
He's a pretty good looking fella.
He was a good looking fella. He was very nice looking.
It's a good thing those genes pass on, right? That's right.
He was a fine looking fella and a fine man. Absolutely. He would have helped anybody. It didn't really matter. He had, in the 1940s, I think, a coal company in Lexington, coal distribution company called Black Cat Coal, and it didn't take off. He had some challenges with it, but he did give jobs to his siblings. And
they were the challenges.
I got you.
The challenges, yes, but he would always help his family. When any of them would go missing, like his dad would go missing, he would go searching for him. He had a brother that would go missing. He'd go searching for them.
And he loved to fish.
He did love to fish. He actually, with his nephews, the Bashir boys in Eastern Kentucky, they went fishing one time, and he ran from many fish and game warden, actually. But one time they went fishing with the Bashir boys, his nephews, and the fish and game warden was coming in, and they all dispersed. And it must have been on a Sunday, because Papa puts his Sunday clothes back on, and he goes walking up the road, and the Fish and Game asked him about the fishing. He goes, well, he says, I'm in my Sunday clothes, so I haven't been fishing. I don't know who you're talking about. But he loved to fish.
That's great. That's a great story. So that's pretty cool. And I think you said that he is one of your favorite people ever on Earth.
He is. Just the fact that he was born and had to quit school at such a young age, but he would take care of his family. He said that he knew he wanted, told me a lot about him when I heard this. He said he knew he wanted to marry my grandmother because she was so well educated. He respected that. And she knew that she'd be well cared for by him because he took care of his family the way that he did. He did not desert his parents. Even though the family gave him a difficult time in life sometimes.
It's a great story.
He would never leave them behind.
It's a great story.
Yeah, he was a good man. He was a good man. But he did inherit his mother's love of jokes too, and a sense of humor. Yeah, there's actually one that, you want to hear that one? Well, actually, wasn't
it's up to you. This is your video, Sue.
It really wasn't a joke, but we were at my cousin's wedding in Arkansas. And we're at the rehearsal dinner. We're at the rehearsal dinner, and everybody's giving a toast. And he raises a glass, and he goes to my cousin's future husband, and he says, "Well, Chris, let's hope you've already gotten your liquor license."
So he's.
Our aunt didn't like that.
Our aunt did not like that too well. She didn't think that was funny, but the rest of us laughed. We thought, yeah. So.
I gotcha.
Yeah, maybe not.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but anyway, he had a way. And actually, he told my dad a joke when they were out working in the fields one day. I think it was before they had children, and he came in and he told Mom that joke. And she said, "Well, Gail, baby, where'd you hear that joke?" And he goes, "Well, your daddy told me that." And she goes, "No, he didn't, because my daddy doesn't talk like that. He doesn't tell jokes like that." And he goes, "Oh, yes, he does."
We probably shouldn't know that joke, but I guess we can guess, right?
I guess we could guess. It might have been a peppermint joke I told you.
Oh, right.
I doubt it, knowing him. But, yeah. Anyway.
So, anything else you'd like to say about your grandpa, BT?
He was the most amazing man. Everybody should have someone like him in his family. And if anybody, and they all do, but if anybody in my family deserves to have their story told, it certainly would be him.
Yeah.
He was one of a kind. I don't know that they'll ever make another one like him. And I definitely was his favorite out of his 14 grandchildren because I was the only one he kept a picture of in his wallet.
That's because he couldn't remember.
That says a lot.
That's because he couldn't remember which one she was, and he had to go back and look at her picture.
Did you hear that? Can you say that louder?
I said that's because he never could remember who Sue was. He had to go back and look at her picture.
Because he loved me so much, he wanted to look at my picture all the time.
Gotcha. I guess we should move on in the video. But I guess he passed away. When did he pass away?
He did. He passed away in July of 1993.
1993.
And his presence is still felt, but definitely still missed to this day.
Awesome. So here we are at the gravesite of Benjamin Taylor, B.T. Watts, here in Thacker Cemetery here in southeastern Clark County, Kentucky, with their granddaughter, Miss Sue Castlebaber. All right, Sue, now we're at, I guess, the gravesite of your grandmother.
My grandmother, Suzanne Elizabeth White Watts.
Momo. Awesome. Let's learn about her.
Let's do it.
She was a well-educated lady, one of Lexington's first telephone operators. Sue is the granddaughter of Susie. Are you named after this, Susan? No. Okay, gotcha. So tell us about Susan, or Susie.
Mama. She was born in September of 1902 in Fayette County. They lived on Greenwich Pike, right off of Russell Cave Road. Her dad worked for Elmendorf Farms, which is actually owned by James Ben Allah Hagen, thoroughbred, wealthy individual. He actually built the house, Green Hills Mansion, I believe, that was on the farm. And she played there quite often as a little girl. But she was best friends with her older brother, Tom Ed. And when she was about 6 years old, she was jumping out of a chicken coop. And the way she landed, she injured a nerve in her left hip.
Wow.
And she was out of school because of it.
A couple of years, I think she said. She was kind of bedridden for a little bit, wasn't she?
She couldn't get around, not very mobile. The interesting thing during those 2 years is because she was at Elmendorf Farms and it brought in a lot of famous people, Alvin Barkley, who ended up being vice president under Truman.
Wow.
He came in and he gave her buggy rides because he kind of felt sorry for the little crippled girl.
Well.
So she had a story to tell there because she had her injury. Yeah, it was kind of neat. But she remembers growing up around that mansion in the columns and the story to tell. So she finally did get to go back to school, though, after 2 years. And she graduated in 1920.
She was a little bit older than she would have been.
She would have been a couple years older.
Yeah, but she finished,
She did. So. She completed her high school education at Russell Cave High School.
Russell Cave High School, which is an elementary school now.
Which is an elementary school now. Actually, interesting thing, too, about her is when she did go back to school, she walked with a limp the rest of her life. And she couldn't walk well to go to school. So her dad ended up purchasing a retired milk horse. And that milk horse on the way to school would stop at every other previous delivery stop along the way.
Cool, that's neat. Every little stop. That's pretty neat.
He would stop there, but he would get her to school eventually. So anyway, she did graduate high school and she got her teaching certificate.
Okay, but
Dad wasn't too thrilled. I think it was because he knew that to get a job, she probably would have left home.
Yeah.
And he wanted to keep her close.
That's understandable.
Yeah.
Hey,
so
I get that.
Yeah, her and her sisters ended up being telephone operators.
That's pretty neat. So that would have been, what, in the 20s?
That would have been in the 20s, early 20s.
Yeah, we had to pick up and say, hey, can you give me...
And can I pull out the little on the board?
That's pretty cool.
Exactly right. That's pretty cool. Her sisters ended up going on and retiring from the phone company.
Now, how did she meet her husband?
When actually in 1915, Papa, his family would have moved in next door. When they were there, they moved around a lot, but they're in that little time frame. And Papa's older sister, Lula, and Mama struck up a good friendship. And they were pals, wrote letters back and forth, and they stayed connected. Unfortunately, when Lula passed away at the young age of 21, Papa wrote Mama a letter to let her know what had happened to her friend. And through writing that letter, they started writing and continued to write letters.
That's really
and
cool.
I like to believe they fell in love by pen pals.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
Yeah,
You've got them letters.
We do. We have those letters still.
That's great.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, really.
Yeah,
that's really
sweet.
Neat. Yeah.
Yeah. So they ended up connecting that way. That would have been in the early 20s, about 22. And they must have written for like 2 or 3 years because they married just Christmas Day, of 1927.
Wow.
He had a little heater in the floorboard and a blanket for her. Heated bricks, so that she'd be warm when she got in the car when they left after. And they got married at her parents' house in front of the fireplace. And the house is still standing on Greenwich Pike.
Neat.
There in Fayette County.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Then they moved to the hills.
And then he takes her from the big city of Lexington to Happy, Kentucky.
Oh, to Happy.
Eastern Kentucky, Happy, Kentucky, to a coal mine camp. But a lot of his family was there, and they were very happy there. They had their first child there. And but by 1930, they're back in Lexington. He's demonstrating mining equipment.
Okay,
At
cool.
that point, he was really involved in safety for mining equipment. And because he was gone a lot, they had living with them a sister of his and two sisters of hers, along with their almost 2-year-old boy.
And she lost both her parents, you know, and
Yes, in the 30s, the late 30s, 1939, she ends up losing both her parents within a 6-month period. Her dad came to live with her when her mother passed away, and within 6 months he grieved himself to death, and he passed away.
oh my gosh.
And that was really, really hard on her. But by 1940, they were living on their farm. Papa was still working the mines, so he was gone quite often. But in the 1940s, she had a lot of fibroid tumors.
Oh, wow.
And she spent about 2 weeks in the hospital, I think in Lexington, having those removed.
Wow.
So they only had 4 children. I think they probably would have had more if it had not been for that medical situation. But
right. She had a little bit of rough stuff, you know.
she did have a little bit of
medical
rough
stuff. Yeah.
She did. But she was anemic most of her life, but persevered. And she didn't let any of that hold her back at all.
I think you said one time, you know, that didn't they have some fires or something?
They did. At one
mines,
point, I believe they were living here in Clark County at that time, and Papa would have been away. I believe it was mid to late 40s, because his dad, Daniel, was living with him at the time. But there were little pop-up fires around.
Oh, wow.
And he was concerned about, he said, Susie, what are we going to do if that happens? And she assured her father-in-law that his son had cut enough of a pathway around the house, that it was okay, that they would be safe, and if something happened, they would go out the back way, that she would open the doors to the barn, let the animals run, and that they would cross the creek, Lubbock Creek, over to safety. But thankfully, they didn't have to do that. But she had a plan.
Lubbock Creek, what is that?
Lubbock Creek. That's the creek that Daniel Boone and his company camped on, reading Gulliver's Travels, and they named it Lubbock.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's pre-1775. That would have been 1769
about
to
1760, almost like 251 years ago,
Yeah,
I think.
really
Now they
cool.
would have been camping
That
here.
creek's right in your backyard.
That creek's in my backyard.
Really cool.
That's exactly right. It is cool.
So I guess they had 14 grandkids.
They did. Again, I was their favorite.
Definitely the favorites, right?
Definitely the favorite. That's right. They had 14 grandkids. We grew up in Lexington, but we loved to spend our summers here. And I was Papa's favorite, of course, and followed him everywhere after Mama fed us.
She's delusional.
After Mama fed us breakfast. She would go through the house and sweep us right outside the door, because kids needed to be outside playing.
Right.
And play we did. We played in the barn. We played in the creek.
Played your Xbox.
Didn't have a clue. Yeah, there's an interesting story about when Pong came out. But so she swept us right out the door with her broom and made us come
to the trade post.
And then that's right. After we would go out, she would listen to the trade post on the radio.
That was cool.
Her. It was pretty cool.
And she lived on a farm the rest of her life. She was very active in the church.
She was. She was the treasurer for the church. Again, the church is right across the road from us, El Bethel United Methodist Church. She was treasurer. She taught VBS.
Awesome.
Most of her friends from the area went to church there. She quilted like her mother did. We have several quilts of her mother's and hers still. She knitted. She loved to play cards. They loved to play rook.
Okay. Poker.
But no, they never played poker.
No,
we play that, but I don't think they ever did. But they played a game called King's Corner that was easier to play a little bit with as they got older. They loved to play that. And she would sit and talk to you, and she'd sit and just deal out solitaire cards. So she'd play solitaire as well. She always raised a big garden, and she would get her baby chicks and raise those chickens around. But by the time they were old enough to fry up, she would definitely from for Sunday dinner.
I think you said she's a chicken wrangler.
She was a chicken wrangler.
Yeah,
That's
buddy.
right. She wrangled her. But the interesting thing, she could wrangle her chicken. She could put them in the chicken jail, as we called it, and fatten them up. But she would faint at the sight of blood.
Mm-hmm.
So when she'd go to wring its neck, she'd turn her head, wring its neck, and then tell us to tell her when it stopped moving.
Okay.
And then she'd take it inside and pluck it and fry it.
And this is one of your favorite memories of her,
That's
I see.
one of my favorite, yeah, it's one that stuck anyway. A favorite or not, but it's one that stuck. But she
Move over here a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. It's been a long time since I've wrung a chicken's neck. I think, yeah. But she helped on the farm in general. She would help with stripping tobacco, go in, fix dinner, go back out and help strip Papa with.
What an awesome grandma.
She was.
Yeah.
She was, yeah.
Momo, I guess she
Mama.
is. Momo.
She was my mama, and she died in January of 1996 at the age of 93.
93,
she lived,
yeah.
93. She
Wonderful.
lived a good long life and a good long legacy.
And now you've documented her for everybody and these wonderful stories in your own words right here at the location, and that's such a wonderful thing that you've done here to document that for everybody in the future. So
yeah,
awesome.
That's why we're here, so that their stories, their life doesn't get forgotten.
We're going to give you one more quick story that's awesome. You want to go ahead and tell us that?
Yeah, right above their little breakfast nook that he built, there was a on the shelf was a little key and then a little lucite globe. And they used to always tell us that she held the key to his heart and that he gave her the world. I know,
That's
touching
really
moment.
cool. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So here we are at the gravesite of Suzanne Elizabeth White Watts, one of the first telephone operators there in Lexington, Kentucky, and one heck of a Momo. All right, Sue, now we're at another headstone here. Do you want to tell us where we're at?
We're getting ready to talk about my father, Gail Douglas Baber.
And who's next to him?
My mother, Eva Jackson Watts Baber.
Awesome, awesome. So let's learn about them.
Let's do that.
He was the most competitive but likable guy. Everybody loved him.
That's right. My father, Gail Douglas Baber.
Awesome, awesome. Tell us about Mr. Baber.
Well, he was my father. No, he was born in Clark County, in town, Winchester, 1930. May of 1930. He would have just turned 90 if he was still living.
Wow.
But he was actually born on the kitchen table at his house in Winchester when they lived on Buckner Street.
Born on the kitchen table.
Born
There's
on
a story
the
there.
kitchen
There
table.
has to be a story.
It has to be a bigger story, but I don't know the rest of it. Unfortunately, I wish I did. So, but when he was a little boy, he was very well liked.
Okay.
People loved him. As a matter of fact, on the very first day of school, he met one of his best friends, G.R. Bush, and G.R. Bush said, I guess to another friend of his, but in general, he said, I need to get to know that little fella. I want to be his friend. And
That's
they
cool.
stayed friends to the point that GR was his best man at his wedding.
Really cool. Really cool.
Yeah. So
I think he said he was a Boy Scout.
he was. He was a proud Boy Scout. He had a paper route. He was the typical little boy growing up in a small town in the 1930s.
Where'd he grow up?
Everybody. He grew up in Winchester.
In Winchester. Okay.
Yeah, in town Winchester. They grew up on Hay Street, out in the county for just a year or two.
Bit,
But
yeah.
then back when he was about 15 or so, they bought a house on Euclid Avenue.
Okay.
And he spent the rest of his till he went off to the Navy.
Okay, so he went to the Navy.
He did. After high school, he joined the Navy. He was in communications on the USS Kearsarge.
USS Kearsarge.
Kearsarge.
Cool.
It was a aircraft carrier.
Oh, wow.
Aircraft carrier. He loved the Navy so much that he loved to tell us stories years later about his time in the Navy, but they were always real interesting stories. But he, one particular story that he always told us was they were transporting some Marines on board the aircraft carrier, and the Marines were bragging about how good of sharpshooters they were. And the Navy's like, well, we'll see if we can find somebody competitive. So they pull out this probably 140-pound scrawny, Dad had to put 5 pounds on just to get in the Navy. He was so skinny. Fella that the Marines were like, well, we can beat him. No. He was taught to shoot by his father, and he outshot every one of them.
I don't believe you.
I
don't believe you. The Marines are the best marksmen in the world.
That's what
Not
they
on
said.
that day.
I used to be an instructor of Marines in shooting, so. But yeah, that's pretty cool.
But yeah.
That's
yeah,
pretty
so
cool.
yeah.
He really must have been able to shoot really
He was
well.
quite a sharpshooter, yes.
Yeah.
Actually, his dad taught himself and his 3 sisters how to shoot.
Oh wow, that's great.
And
So
actually
it's a family thing then.
Yeah, his sisters outshot him too. They were better shots even. So,
I believe that. Yes, I do definitely.
Don't mess with the female in a gun.
Females are really, really good, or really, really not good at shooting. So,
they were really, really good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So he spends his time in the Navy during the Korean War. Got around to Japan. His last tour was around San Diego, and actually had set up a civilian job out of San Diego to go back to once.
Cool.
But when he came home and visited, his mother had had a heart attack.
Oh wow!
And he ended up staying and not going back to that job, which is probably a really good thing, because it wasn't long after that he met my mother.
Awesome.
So if he'd have gone back, that wouldn't have happened.
How did he meet your mother?
They actually were kind of on 2 or 3 couples had gone out, just hanging out. He was with just a good girlfriend, not girlfriend, but a friend of his that was a girl. And
she went to school with her sister.
Went to school with her sister. And she actually went with G.R. Bush, because G.R. and Mom knew each other. That's actually how Mom and Dad met, was through G.R., Dad's best friend. And G.R. and Mom were just friends, but they came on this date together, and they were hanging out at somebody's house and sitting on a couch. And then the girl that Dad had brought was sitting right in between Mom and him. Uh-oh. And he's like put his arm behind Paulina. Her name was Paulina. Interesting country name. Yeah. And starts playing with Mom's ear.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And of course she's swatting him off, because she thinks that Paulina and Dad are dating. And he calls her the next day or 2 and wants to go out with her, and she gets mad at him because she can't believe that he calls her.
He's pretty slick.
But he finally convinces her that they're just friends, and that so she finally goes on a date with him.
That's really cool.
Yeah. But poor little fella had already started to lose some hair, going bald on top. So her sister said that she couldn't date a man that was that old. And she's like, he's not that old. He just doesn't have hair.
Was he actually older than your mother?
He was about 4.5, almost 5 years old.
How about that? In a string of about 500 years, we finally find a man that's older than the female.
That's right. Yeah, but then my sister marries a guy that's younger than her, so she carried on the family.
Aha, there you go.
So it still runs in the family.
So I guess he went to EKU? Eastern Kentucky University?
He went to Eastern Kentucky for a little while. Then they married. They lived in the Army barracks there that were converted to married housing.
Wow.
He studied accounting. While they were at the barracks, they had an open field, and him and his one of his buddies used to shoot at the rats going across the open field too. So he carried on his sharpshooting abilities.
That's pretty cool.
Good use. Yeah.
Killed the rats.
Killed the rats. And so he got a degree in accounting.
Nifty.
They moved to Louisville because he got a job with the IRS.
Right.
And worked with them for several years, but...
Worked for the IRS.
Worked for the IRS, but here's the interesting story is, he was too nice for the IRS.
Okay.
Because clients would call him up and they wanted to speak to Mr. Baber all the time because he was nice to them. And the IRS didn't like that. So they called him in and said, you don't need to be so nice. And he's like, he had to rethink his career choice, because it's like, I don't think I can work for a company that...
You told me that everybody loved this guy, but he worked for the IRS.
I know, that doesn't...
It's an oxymoron right there, right? So.
Well, he didn't work for them long, because not long after that, they moved back to Lexington.
So I think you said that he actually was he in the Masons?
He was in the Masons. He was very actively involved in the Masons. He became, in the mid to late 1970s, Kentucky's highest holding Masonic individual, his title would have been the Grand High Priest of the Royal Archmasons of Kentucky.
Say that one more time.
The Grand High Priest of the Royal Archmasons of Kentucky. And we have a really cool portrait that we'll show of him in his little jewels as the Grand High Priest.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
But he joined when he was really, really young. He had a grandfather that was a Mason, and he ended up subsequently becoming a Shriner, member of the Knights Templar, the Red Cross, the chapter, Scottish Rite. Yeah. If there was a fraternal order, he was a part of it.
That's pretty neat.
And then he became actively involved on a national and international level. And by the time we had children to come along and we had taken vacations, we would go with his meetings and then take a week or 2 vacation after he would go to his meetings.
Speaking of that, that brings me to another thing, and that isn't in what the thing you wanted to say, but I think he's the one that spurned your love for history, isn't it?
He is. He loved history. Absolutely loved history.
You didn't go on any vacations if it wasn't historically related, right?
We did not. We never went to the beach and just sat on the beach. We would go someplace. He would hand us the AAA books and say, find out someplace to go visit, and we're going to learn about it.
Me and your dad could hang out pretty good.
We'd go to forts. We'd go to battleships. Battlegrounds.
You say he'd always have to turn our car around if he drove past the historic marker. We got to read that, right?
That's exactly right. If we went by a historic marker and he didn't know what it said, he'd have to go find out. So he loved history, especially military history.
Okay.
Loved it.
Sure.
And was usually reading 3 or 4 books at a time.
Okay.
Usually a biography, but almost always about history or military history.
And he also was a coach, I guess. He
coached us in softball. That's right.
How about that?
He loved, and like we said at the tag in the beginning, very competitive. He played sports. Loved to play tennis, and when he was at EKU, he would constantly beat the tennis players on the tennis team.
Oh, cool.
And the coach kept trying to get him to join the team, but at the time he was school full-time, working and married.
Wow.
And he just didn't have time.
Yeah.
But he would go just to practice with them and beat them all the time.
That's really cool.
And,
he played tennis all his life, didn't he?
He played tennis just about all of his life, and he passed that love to me. I played with him a lot, but the man would never let you win. It did not matter if you were playing cards, playing tennis, playing a board game when we were little kids, that you think he'd win. He was competitive. If you won on your own right.
How about that?
I don't think I ever beat him in tennis. He was just that good.
You ever beat him in cards?
Not often. Not often. It was probably a fluke, or he wasn't feeling well that day.
Right.
yeah. But
I think you mentioned that him along with your grandfather VT was your heroes.
They were.
Extremely inspirational and important to you in your life.
Two of the most amazing men that I ever knew. Very thankful for their influence in my life. Neither one of them knew a stranger. They would have helped anybody in the world, and everybody seemed to love them too. They're just very, very personable. Dad would have talked to a fence post if it would have talked back to him. He talked to people in the middle of nowhere that he never knew before.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Awesome. So,
just an amazing man. He ended up, after he left the IRS, where he worked for about 10 years, he ended up at UK and retired from UK as an internal auditor. Loved the university. I guess that love of learning and reading and history. He loved to be on campus talking to people. He would.
Is that why you're a Louisville fan?
Bite your tongue.
A Tennessee fan.
Wrong color. Let's see. Possibly a Wildcat for life.
I understand.
Yes, definitely. And we had to go to UK. That's where I went to college. All 4 of us went to UK. Basically because Dad got a discount because he worked there.
Sure.
Had no choice, but great college. But he
absolutely.
Retired from there. He would talk about shooting pool with Coach Hall and CM Newton.
Neat.
And loved
Bill Kitely, Mr. Wildcat.
Mr. Wildcat, absolutely. He hung out with every one of them and loved them. They loved him. And he ended up retiring from there in the mid-90s. And lived about 5 more years after that. He had some heart trouble. And he had to have heart surgery. He passed away in February of 2000. He did get to see the new millennium, so so that was pretty cool. But where he was on board ship, the Navy ship, there was a lot of asbestos, and he picked up cigarette smoking, and it damaged his lungs.
Mesothelioma.
It never was diagnosed, but I always thought it was mesothelioma, but it was more that it was pulmonary fibrosis, which is basically the lungs couldn't do that air exchange. So he ended up not being able to breathe.
Sure.
And passed away in February of 2000.
He sounds like he was a wonderful man, a wonderful father, and leader and inspirer to everybody around him. And like you said, you told me that he was, everybody loved him. He was a coach. He was a Mason, a community servant, loved his family, and a great father. So one heck of a man. It's hard shoes to fill, isn't he?
Very much so.
Yeah,
Very much so. He set the standard, and you don't find men like that too much anymore.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you for taking us to the graveside of your father, Mr. Gail D. Baber. And who's next to him?
Eva Jackson Watts Baber.
Awesome. So let's learn about them.
Let's do that. She was mathematical, she was a beauty, and she loved people, and she was very talented. Talking about her, Eva Jackson Watts Baber.
Eva Jackson Watts Baber.
Named after both her grandmothers, Evelina and Temperance Jackson was her paternal.
Why is she called Jackson?
We think, the story has been told anyway to us, we've not proved it by DNA, that Jackson could be a family name passed on to my great-great-great-grandmother, who the story goes could be the illegitimate daughter of Andrew Jackson.
Wow! Holy cow! The illegitimate daughter of Andrew Jackson.
President Andrew Jackson.
Making Andrew Jackson maybe your 5th great grandfather.
That's exactly.
Wouldn't that be cool? That's one of my personal heroes. That'd be awesome.
That would be awesome to prove that. We'll not prove that one day.
But you'd have to do it via DNA. But there's a lot of people that are, a lot of people in your family that's a family story. That's not just a.
That's right. Not just down through my direct line, but through cousins. It was told to them as well.
Wow.
So there's. Yeah, it was
interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
So where was your mother born at?
She was born at Darfort, Kentucky, coal mine camp, and in 1935, February of 1935. And by 1937, though, she, along with her family, they moved to Clark County in the area that we're standing in right now.
So while she was a kid, I think you said that she was real talented. She played.
She did. She played clarinet when she was in high school. She played in the school play. She was very athletic. She loved to run. She would outrun her siblings as they were coming home from school, and then she'd have to turn back, run, and walk back with them.
That's cool.
Yeah, very athletic. Loved to be outside. She loved to swim. She had a lot of friends. They would always hang out together, and then she ended up going to UK.
Okay.
And about the time that she started at UK is about the time that she met Dad.
Okay.
And they dated while she was at UK. She only spent her freshman year, though. And when they married in the following year, she transferred to EKU.
Okay.
And she was a math major.
Neat. Wow.
She was a math major. And while she was at UK, though, her freshman year, a math professor put a problem up on the board. And she sat there and was trying to solve it, and she couldn't solve it because he had figured it wrong. And she told him that. And he said, "I don't think so, Miss Watts." And he goes, "Well, if you think it's wrong, show me how it's right." So she went up to the board, she corrected it. He stood back for a minute and said, "Well, you're absolutely right. In all these years I've taught this class, nobody's ever corrected me on that problem. Well done."
That's a neat story. That's a neat story. At least he admitted.
He was polite and he admitted it. That's why he didn't shame her in front of the class.
Right.
Absolutely. So they married, went to EKU. She went to EKU with him and stayed there till he graduated.
Okay.
She had some medical issues and she ended up not graduating, but she was always told she couldn't have children for about 4 years. They were married and wasn't able to conceive. And she finally did. With my older sister, and when Lisa was in delivery, she almost died. Lisa and Mom both almost died. Lisa swallowed amniotic fluid, and they had to really fight for her life. And Mom had a difficult, complicated delivery. She actually had a complicated delivery with all 4 of us.
Oh, wow.
We were kind of fairly large babies, 9 pounds with Lisa, all the way to almost 11 pounds with my younger brother. And after him, it was like, that's enough. That's enough. So
big babies.
But thankfully, her and my older sister survived, and she went on to have 3 more children, and thankfully, that was enough after 4.
Awesome. I think you said she was very good. She was good at sewing, I think.
She was actually. The woman was a bit of a clothes horse. She loved to dress nicely. And she knew growing up, if she wanted nice clothes, she needed to sew them. She needed to make them herself. So she became a talented seamstress. And that translated as she got a little older, after all 4 children were born, she started her own business. And she made custom window treatments, draperies, anything for the home. Decorators would come to her. She had her workroom at the house.
Neat.
So she was always home.
Yeah.
But she was able to run her business for 30 years.
Wow, you have some really talented parents.
Yeah, they both were very talented.
Wow,
Yeah.
what happened to you?
Not sure what happened.
I'm just kidding.
It did not pass on. I took the love of history.
Right. Just teasing you.
And Mom's personality, so,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You seem to have humor is definitely a theme in your ancestors.
Yeah,
it
in
really
my mom's family, absolutely. Yeah. So they ended up raising us in Fayette County. We all went ended up graduating from public school there and on to UK where Dad worked. But she loved her flowers. She was a master gardener. She probably had the greenest thumb in the whole world. After she would work, the way she relaxed was going out in her garden. And if I didn't inherit that part from her, if I killed the plant or tried to, she could bring it back to life.
Wow.
Yeah, she had beautiful. And we still have the effects of her garden at the farm now, where she planted some of her flowers. They're
Wonderful.
Still growing.
Yeah.
So she's very talented, and she loved to laugh. She loved people. People loved her. She was very active when we were young in Homemakers, and made good connections, good friends there as well. Became active again as she was married in the church that her parents would have taught in. Right across the road from us, and became active again in it as we got a little older, and became an important part of her life. And she was actually she loved to laugh, very happy person. Rarely ever saw her mad.
Okay.
When she did get mad, you'd know it.
Well, you told me a story about when you were little.
Yeah. And sometimes not so little. We'd act up when we were out in public, and she wouldn't yell at us, she wouldn't fuss at us, but she would grab us by the hair, the nape of our neck, and she would just pull as tight as she could, and in the lowest voice, she would tell us, "You better calm down, you're going home, and your dad's going to hear about this." And,
she let Dad be the bad guy.
She let Dad be the bad guy.
Dad was the enforcer.
We might have had the switch or a belt when we got home, depending on if the situation warranted.
Understand.
Yeah.
Understand.
Yeah. But she was just a very loving, loved to laugh individual. She people loved her.
Loved to entertain.
She loved to entertain people. She loved to have people enter her home and make sure that they were happy and entertained and fellowship with them, and never missed an opportunity to do that. Loved to travel with Dad. They traveled quite a bit. I'm not sure if she loved our historical vacations as much as Dad and we did, but she always went along with us and enjoyed family time.
Wonderful.
Yeah, she was pretty amazing. She always said, though, that she really wished that maybe she wasn't named after her grandmothers, because Evelina died from cancer. And that's how Mom died, was from a stomach cancer. And then her other grandmother, Temperance Jackson, she had diabetes, and Mom had diabetes later on in life as well. So she said she inherited both of those things, but ended up passing away in July of 2014, just coming up on 6 years that she's been gone. She's was very, very amazing, loving mother. Wasn't perfect, but in my eyes, she certainly was.
Understand that.
Yeah.
Understand that. Yeah. So here we are at the gravesite of Ava Jackson Watts Baber, the mother of Sue here. All right, Sue, here we are in the shade now. And
thank you, Lord.
And this is the end of our video. And we have been visiting all different of your ancestors.
All day, all different.
Yeah, spread out over almost 200 years worth of ancestors right here. And in what, 4 generations, your great-greats, your grands, and your parents, kind of thing. So thanks for bringing us out here. What do you have anything to say about our journey today?
Yeah, actually, I started my genealogy trip about 10 years ago, not really knowing a lot about my family. Most of my family didn't talk about it, and I found out later in life they knew about it.
Oh.
So I really wanted the opportunity to be able to get this documented, and more than just on paper, because a lot of people don't take the time to read.
Sure.
And I think that you're able to tell this in your own words.
Absolutely,
so I love the fact that we can go over and tell. I would love to have known what my some great-great-grandparents' personalities were like.
Sure.
What did they like to do? Were they funny? Were they mean? What were they?
Yep.
Just tell me that, and this way I can talk about the ones that I did know and tell their story.
You definitely have, because, I think that most people say, as a genealogist, people will say, hey, send me something about our people. Well, send you what?
Send you what?
What send are you looking for? You want a book? You're not going to read that, but they're going to watch these videos.
Right.
These videos will get edited, get produced, put on YouTube, be able to be shared and put on other websites and things. And they'll be able to be found, and you'll be able to learn about your ancestors from your words for thousands of years.
Exactly.
At least hundreds of years.
At least hundreds of years.
Kind of thing.
So new technology comes along and you can't play this anymore.
That's really cool. And I think that's awesome that you've done that, kind of thing, because most people don't get an opportunity to do that, and that's something you should be honored for, kind of thing.
Yeah,
so
I'm very appreciative of the fact that you've taken the time to help walk me through this and been able to get this type of documentation.
I love the journey. You've had some amazing ancestors, that were, Georgia Peach on the plantation that owned slaves and lost pretty much everything and moved to Kentucky, and rebel rousers and
coal miners and just average, UK fans.
Very intelligent people, and talented people.
But what I take away the most, what I really want to give back for people to understand is how much they loved each other, how much they loved community, how much they had important stories to tell too.
Yeah. That's what I get from it. Yeah. That's what I've gotten from the journey. It's kind of spiritual a little bit.
A little bit. This is almost a spiritual place for me. I do actually take care of the cemetery. My family and I are blessed to be able to carry on the family tradition because my grandmother and great-grandmother and her sisters did, and the opportunity to tell the stories of the people who are here and the lives that they led.
Yeah, and you could do it too. You could do this same thing here that Sue's done, and you can check us out. Contact us at Family Tree Nuts, of course. But anything else you want to say before we take off today?
Start talking, people.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for bringing us to Thacker Cemetery, the home of all of these ancestors of yours, with amazing stories and some great stuff that needs to be told. And hey, remember, Family Tree Nuts. Let our nuts find the nuts in your family tree.